Good evening. It's Old Testament time here, 1 Samuel chapter 16. As we work our way through 1 Samuel, remember Saul has been rejected as king, and now we're going to meet the new king that God chooses, and is an unlikely one. Chapter 16, verse 1, 1 Samuel. And the Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul?" Now Saul told Samuel what God told him, and but he still loved him, and he mourned over him being rejected. "How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I've rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, and go and send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite. For I've provided me a king among his sons." God's sending him to a fellow named Jesse who lives down at the little town of Bethlehem, and he's got a whole bunch of boys, and all Samuel knows is that God says one of them boys is going to be the next king of Israel. He's the one I've chosen. But Samuel's kind of feared of his life right now. After he's had to tell Saul the bad news, he tells the Lord, "If I go down there, Saul's liable to come and kill me." Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hear it, he'll kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I've come to sacrifice to the Lord." Now, there's something in this I want to point out to you that God didn't tell him to lie. God told him, "You go down there, and we're going to anoint the next king of Israel." And Samuel protests and says, "Well, if I go down there, Saul's in that area. He's going to come over here and kill me." And God's like, "Well, you don't have to tell him everything. Don't tell him why you're really there. But take a sacrifice with him and say, well, I've come down here to sacrifice to the Lord." And it's the truth, see? And he don't have to spill all his brains. And the Lord tells him, says, "Now call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I'll show you what you will do. And thou shalt anoint unto me him whom I name unto thee." And Samuel did that which the Lord spake. I hope you're doing that too. Hope you're doing what God speaks. Samuel did that which the Lord spake, and came to Bethlehem. And when the town leaders who sat at the gate back in those days saw Samuel, it scared them, like, "Oh, we're in trouble. It must be some kind of trouble. He's coming down to call judgment down from God or something." They said, the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, "Comest thou peaceably? Are you coming in peace, we hope?" And he said, "Peaceably. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves," or set yourself apart. We're getting ready to have something to do in the worship of the Lord here. You can participate in the sacrifice with me if you'll set yourself apart and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons, and he called them to the sacrifice. And it came to pass when they were come that he looked upon one of Jesse's boys, maybe the oldest one, I guess, named Eliab. And when Samuel looked upon him, he said, "Surely that's the Lord's anointed right there. That's a good-looking young man." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Look not on his countenance, nor on the height of his stature, because I've refused him." That ain't him. "For the Lord sees not as man seeth. For man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart." Now, I've heard this over my ministry before, that people use that as an excuse to dress like bums when they come to the Lord's house. Well, the Lord looks on the inside. Well, if that's the best you've got, then that's the best you can do. But there's two truths right here. There's two truths that you need to get out of this. Yes, the Lord, it's what's on the inside that's important. It's not the outward adorning of silver or gold, but it's the hidden man of the heart, Peter said. It's what's on the inside that counts. But the other truth is that we live among humans, and people do look at the outward appearance. And just remember that. There's two truths right there. And whether you think it's fair or not, the difference between you getting the job and some other guy getting the job sometimes might be how you dress. You might be more qualified, but if you show up in Bermuda shorts, you might not get the job. You say, "Well, what's on the inside is important." Well, man looks on the outward appearance. Don't ever forget that truth. Then Jesse called Abinadab, another son of his, and in verse 8, and he made him pass before Samuel. And he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one, Then Jesse made another boy, Shammah, to pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse's parading them all before Samuel, because Samuel knows that the Lord said one of Jesse's sons is going to be king, so he's bringing them probably from the oldest to the least. So eventually Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to these, the Lord's not chosen these. It ain't him. And Samuel looked around, verse 11, and said to Jesse, are here all your children? And Jesse said, there remains one. I got one more. He's the youngest one. And he's up keeping the sheep. Jesse thought it ain't going to be him, that little old boy. He keeps the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, you send and fetch him, and we'll not sit down till he comes hither. This is important. We're not going to quit till he comes. And he sent, and he brought him. And this youngest little boy, Jesse's, that come back, the Bible says now he was ruddy. And my understanding is that means David was a red-headed Israelite. And this little red-headed boy comes up, and it says he had a beautiful countenance and goodly to look to. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is he. Now see, it tells us what he looked like on the outside, but God was looking on the inside. But both of them people were looking at the outside, but God said, that's him. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and it anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David, the new king he's going to be, from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But now the Spirit of the Lord's come upon David as far as the leadership of the nation at this time. But Saul don't want to give it up. But guess what it says next? But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. So the Lord allowed a demonic spirit to come and trouble old King Saul now. And Saul's servant said unto him, behold, now an evil spirit from God troubles thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants which were before thee to seek out a man who's a cunning player on a harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God's upon thee, that he may play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. This is called music therapy. They knew about it back then, and it still works today. People's having mental problems or in a bad mood or something, they just put on the right kind of music. And if you put on that old angry, violent kind of music, what's it going to do? It's going to exacerbate the problem. But if you put on something more calming, then it can work the other way. So they knew about that. And they said, let's go get somebody that can play the harp and make you feel better and listen to the music, and maybe that spirit will quit troubling you. "17. And Saul said to his servants, okay, provide now me a man that can play well and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, behold, I've seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning, or he's good. He's a good player. He's a good harp picker. And he's a mighty valiant man too. He's not some little wimpy sissy boy. And he's a man of war, and he's prudent in matters, and he's a nice looking guy. He's a comely person, and the Lord's with him too. He's a godly man. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, send me David, your son, which is with the sheep. Now Saul don't know any of this stuff, that David is going to be his replacement, but he just heard he's a good musician. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a bottle of wine and a kid, and he sent them by David his son to Saul. You're going to see the king, take him some gifts. And David came to Saul, and David stood before him. And Saul loved David greatly, and David became Saul's armor bearer, somebody to go into battle with him. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he's found favor in my sight. I want that boy yours to work for me. Now, God's plan was that David's going to take over the throne, and that's eventually going to happen, but there's going to be a lot of chapters in between here. So it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp, and he played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. Now, there's something about that music, ain't there? I tell you what, I believe God gave me this over 30 years ago, and I was in a little church, and a couple had a couple kids as young, and I don't know about these haunted houses things, but they were convinced that there was a demon or a ghost in their house or something. They had me to come out. They wanted to, I guess to have an exorcism of their home. And I just thought of this verse here. I said, you know what? I said, when David played his harp, the evil spirit fled from King Saul. I said, if you're worried about this ghost or demon spirit or whatever it is in your house, I said, why don't you play a lot of good gospel music? He ain't going to hang around there very long. And I never heard of him having any trouble again, so I guess it worked. You might file that away in the back of your head. We'll see you next week, chapter 17.